You hear that? Can only mean one thing. All right. Hey, everybody. It's great to see you, or at least see your names on a list. I can't really see anybody, but you guys have to see me. Uh, so thanks for being here today. Hello and welcome to Mid-Atlantic Arts Folk and Traditional Community Projects informational webinar, not informal webinars. I keep reading it. My name is Joel Chapman. I'm the Program Associate for Folk and Traditional Arts at Mid-Atlantic Arts. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a white man with blonde hair and wearing a sage button-up shirt. I'm speaking to you today from Baltimore, Maryland. It's beautiful. I'm waging an unsuccessful battle against the humidity and trying to not get out my AC unit just yet for this room. Again, from Baltimore, Maryland, the traditional and ancestral lands of the Cherokee and Shawnee nations. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and future. And because land acknowledgement does little to right the wrongs of the past, I also want to share a link to the Heartbeat Music Project. It's a scholarship and it provides music education to K through 12 students on the Navajo Reservation. If you feel like you can, consider making even just a $5 donation. If not, I get that too. Keep it in mind for the next time you feel like you have the cash to give to a good cause. And Ellie, did you put that in? Let me put that in the chat real quick. Also here with me today is my colleague, Ellie. She'll be monitoring the Q&A and helping with any technical difficulties. Ellie, can you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Ellie Dassler. I'm the Program Director for Folk and Traditional Arts at Mid-Atlantic Arts. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a white woman with dark hair, short dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt. It's nice to be with you all today.
Thank you, Ellie. Well, let's go ahead and get going. So first, I want to share a little bit more about Mid-Atlantic Arts for those of you who might not be familiar, might not know about us. Mid-Atlantic Arts is one of 6 regional arts organizations in the United States, and our member states and territories include Delaware, District of Columbia, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, Virginia, and West Virginia. To give you some idea of who we are within the National Arts Service Organization ecosystem, there are kind of on the smaller end, local arts agencies on the county or city level, state arts agencies, regional arts organizations such as ourselves, and then, the big dogs, National Endowment for the Arts at the top and the federal level. Mid-Atlantic Arts has historically distinguished itself through its work in international cultural exchange, performing arts touring, its knowledge and presence in the jazz field, and its support of folk and traditional arts. So let's get going, right? So we'll have a Q&A period at the end of today's webinar. So we'll answer all your questions then, write them down as we go. If you'd like to ask a question, simply type it into the Q&A box, assessed through the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll work down the list and try to answer all the questions when the time comes at the end. Guidelines are available at midatlanticarts.org in PDF format, as well as an accessible Word file. To request an accommodation at any point during your application process, please contact me, Joel Chapman, 667-401-2488, or my email address, jchapman@midatlanticarts.org. Accommodations must be requested no later than 2 weeks prior to the application deadline. All right, so what are these grants? So Mid-Atlantic Arts Folk and Traditional Community Projects grants, that's the government name. They fund projects designed to support the vitality of traditional arts and cultural communities in the Mid-Atlantic region. Today, we're going to cover all the aspects of this grant program, which include an overview of folk and traditional arts, grant information and eligibility, grant award limitations, review criteria, application and review process, and project timeline. Great. So, what are folk and traditional arts? That's what this program specifically funds. So let's take a step back and look at what this is. What are the folk and traditional arts? The NEA explains that these are folklore are elements of culture that community members may share, such as common ethnic heritage, cultural morals, language, religion, occupation, or geographic region. These are vital and constantly reinvigorated artistic traditions that are shaped by values and standards of excellence that are passed from generation to generation, most often within family and community, through demonstration, conversation, and practice. Folk and traditional arts include craft, material culture, foodways, dance, music, storytelling, and more. We think of folk and traditional arts as creative practices that are based in and reflective of the knowledge, practices, and creativity of cultural communities. They encompass everyday art and aesthetics that are often part of a greater community-based context. What do I mean by this? Maybe a specific example will be helpful. Oh, sorry. Can you go to the next slide, Ellie? Some folks might look at this and see a hand-woven basket, simply, which would certainly be an example of a folklore by itself. But if we look at the cultural context of this object, it will reveal additional knowledge, like the kind of tree or reed cane it came from, where to harvest it, how to process it. Why is it so hard to find white oak these days? Stories of romping through the forest. Why are there so many weavers in this particular region? The occupational lore behind weaving baskets. And overall, the role it may play in someone's identity. These are all dimensions of what we call folklore. So now that we're primed on that, we can talk about this particular program. See, where are we at? Great. For this particular program, nonprofit organization, units of government, or federally recognized tribal governments in the Mid-Atlantic region can apply for funding amounts from $1,000 to $7,000 to engage folk and traditional arts practitioners or culture bearers in community-based projects. Eligible projects include, but are not limited to, performances, public art collaborations, workshop trainings, exhibitions, fieldwork documentation, and creation of original traditional artwork. Go ahead to the next slide. This is one of our past grants, and they're doing great work. Look how fun that is. That could be you. All right, let's keep going. So projects must include some publicly accessible component. This could be a performance, could be an event, an exhibit, a video, podcast, Q&A session, public interest meeting, archival collection, website, or report. The sky's the limit. We encourage projects that cross sectors, so state or territory borders. But we also encourage, like projects that connect organizations, artists, and practitioners within one state or territory as well. As long as there's groups interacting with each other, that's encouraged. In alignment with Mid-Atlantic's strategic vision to promote equity, diversity, inclusion, and access, applications for projects that support or engage underserved or underrepresented artists, practitioners, traditions, or constituents are strongly encouraged. So, who's eligible? Well, your organization must be located in Delaware, DC, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, Virginia, and West Virginia, as I stated earlier. Hopefully you all are there in one of these. If not, this might not be your webinar. And also in that list are Native nations that share this geography. Your organization must be a 501c3 nonprofit, a unit of state or local government, or a federally recognized Indian tribal government. Units of state or local government must provide a document on official letterhead to confirm status as a governmental entity. And unfortunately, fiscal sponsorship is not permitted for this program. Your organization must also be in good standing with Mid-Atlantic Arts with no overdue or outstanding required reports or grant documents. I know that's no one here, though, so we're good. Come on. Grant limitations, award limitations. We only fund the specific direct costs of the project, and no grant funds may be used for indirect costs. Direct costs are specified in the budget section of the application and must include artist fees, program staff salary, marketing and promotional expenses, supplies and equipment, or rental or purchases, no more than $1,000 per item, printing, publishing costs, artist or cultural worker travel or lodging expenses, and expenses related to public health measures for in-person engagements. An additional note on the supply equipment purchases or rental of equipment. Any equipment purchase cannot be used for any non-project activity during the active grant period. After the grant period, supplies and equipment may be retained, provided they will be used for activities similar to those that the project of the funded project. It's important to know that grants must be matched on a one-to-one basis. The match may not include federal funds, and the grant and required match may not be used to match other federal funds. And this means whether they're received directly from a federal agency or indirectly, such as through a state agency or other entity. So we've altered our criteria slightly from last year. If you were an applicant then, you'll remember we had 3 main areas of criteria, which were a bit bulky. So we've expanded them into what we hope are 7, well, we know are 7. We've expanded them into 7, we hope more digestible criterion. And these will correspond directly to the questions you'll be asked on the application. So let's go through them a little bit here. 1 is traditional art form. So the project's featured tradition art form. It's important and relevant to the community it engages. Project personnel, the staff and featured artists are experienced and appropriate for the project as defined by their community, audiences, outside recognition, or some combination of the 3. Community collaboration. The project centers collaboration with the community and featured artists, including in project design, execution, and evaluation. 4, diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. The project serves and reaches artists and communities whose opportunities to experience the arts are limited by geography, race and ethnicity, economics, or disability. 5, accessibility. The project considers and defines a clear plan for accessibility accommodations. 6, evaluation. There is a clear plan for defining and measuring the success of the project. And 7, project budget, the bean count section. The project includes evidence of direct, fair compensation to artists, practitioners, and/or cultural workers. And everything I just said, I'll say it again later, but is on our guidelines right now for your reference. A diverse group of folk and traditional art specialists, including folklorists, cultural workers, artists, cultural bearers, whatever you want to call them, they will serve as panelists and provide program feedback informed by their role in the application review. And I'll share more about what happens to your application after you submit it in a subsequent slide. So you submitted. Time to pop the champagne. No, you got to wait. What's happening afterwards? So here's the timeline. Applications opened April 24th of this year and are due June 10th. Applicants will be notified of grant award approval by August 31st, 2024. And all project activities need to take place from September 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. How to apply. Here are the required application materials. We'll need your applicant information, project details and narrative, project budget, and work samples. We have project personnel and organizational bios here, and I don't think that's in the application anymore. Ellie, correct me if I'm wrong. Work samples are a critical part of your application and are considered carefully during panelist review. Samples should demonstrate quality of artistic content and/or technical ability as applicable. They should be recent, concise, high quality, and as relevant as possible to the project. Panelist review of work samples is limited to no more than 20 minutes per application, so be selective in what you choose to submit. We highly recommend limiting your selections to 3 to 4 of your best substantive work samples that are relevant to your project. You can submit audio, video, image, or document work samples. Video and audio must be submitted via URL. So, upload those to YouTube or whatever your choice is. An image and document can be uploaded directly. For audio and video samples, please submit no more than 3 per application. Individual samples should not exceed 5 minutes. If a clip exceeds 5 minutes, make sure to indicate, which 5-minute portion the reviewers need to look at. For image work samples, please submit no more than 10 images per application. And for document work samples, please submit no more than 4 documents. And please don't make them 100-page documents either. I think we got a picture. Oh, no. How to apply. You can access our online application at midatlanticarts.smartsimple.com. There's a link to it also on our main website, midatlanticarts.org, that you can find. And you can view a sample application on our website. Remember that applications are due June 10th, 2024. But let's go over some tips, yeah? I recommend you start with the program guidelines, much of which I've kind of spoken here in this meeting, so it should be a nice review reading over them if you're in attendance today. Make sure to read all the application instructions thoroughly. I know it's really riveting stuff, but it is very important to make your application as competitive as possible. Last point here. Reviewing the criteria cannot be stressed enough. The review criteria listed in the program guidelines and what I just went over a little bit ago will be used by the panelists to evaluate your application. The better your application meets these criteria, the more likely it is that your application will be funded. And again, these are detailed in your guidelines document. So after you submit, what's going to happen? Well, first, Mid-Atlantic staff will review your application for eligibility concerns. That's me. Then applications, including work samples, are sent to panelists. We have 5 this year, 5 panelists, who will evaluate applications against those program criteria we mentioned earlier. Then, when the panelists meet, they'll make grant recommendations after scoring everything, and we'll send those to our board of directors for approval. After that, notifications will go out to our applicants by September 1st, by the end of August. a little over 2 months after the June 10th deadline. So that's pretty much all I got today. I really appreciate everyone being here. You know, you could be anywhere today and you chose to be here with me. What questions can I answer for you all? You can type questions in the Q&A feature anytime. We got 40 minutes here. So go crazy. While folks are typing their questions, I want to also encourage you to sign up for the Mid-Atlantic Arts newsletter on midatlanticarts.org. I'll put a link here in a little bit once I stop once I stop talking. If you aren't receiving emails from us already, I highly encourage it. You'll get to know about all of our grant opportunities first thing when they roll out. When you sign up for the newsletter online, you will receive targeted emails for grant opportunities. So, you can click Folk and Traditional as a concentration that you want to know about specifically. And you'll get those reminders about upcoming program deadlines. We don't automatically add you to our mailing list for signing up just for this webinar. So please make sure to sign up if you would like to receive updates. When you visit the website, please just click on the upper center top kind of smaller line where it says sign up for newsletter.
We got some questions, Joel.
Great.
Thank you all for your questions. First of all, I noticed a couple of these questions I think are clarifications to some things in the PowerPoint. I think we accidentally were looking at a slightly older PowerPoint, so some of the dates were incorrect. I apologize for that. We can answer that question easily. Erica Ruben asked the project starting September, it should say starting September 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. That is the project period for this grant program. So if you are applying for this, your project has to take place between those dates, this coming September and the following end of June. We have another question that said, Christina Murray asked, can artists involved in a proposed project bring different cultural backgrounds to a unifying central theme? It's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had very successful projects do just that. That could mean a lot of different things. So I encourage you to call me and we'll talk it through. But on the surface, that sounds like a great idea. Ellie, do you have anything to add?
Not really, but yes, cross-cultural, intercultural projects are absolutely encouraged. Like you said, like Joel said, I encourage you to call one of us to talk about how you might describe those different cultural backgrounds and how they'll interact with each other in your narrative, because we may be able to have a more specific conversation about the best way to explain your approach. But absolutely, cross-cultural projects are always exciting to see in our application pool. Maria Russo asked, what is fiscal sponsorship? That's a really good question. Do you want me to answer this one, Joel?
Yeah, because I always get it wrong.
Sure. Yeah, so fiscal sponsorship happens when one organization serves as an official grantee and passes through the funding to another organization or entity to actually carry out the project. So that would mean, let's say a nonprofit organization was receiving a grant and passing through the money to a different organization that maybe did not have nonprofit status to actually fulfill the grant requirements. So that is not allowed for this program, which means that if you are applying, your organization has to be a nonprofit organization, a unit of local government, a federally recognized tribal government agency or entity. And your organization has to be responsible for carrying out the grant as well as applying for and receiving the funding. That doesn't mean that you can't partner with for-profit entities or individual artists. In fact, that is encouraged, but the nonprofit organization that is applying for and receiving a grant is responsible for carrying out the grant, and you cannot pass through the funding to a different entity to be responsible for the grant. That is probably not a legally binding way of describing fiscal sponsorship. I'm not a lawyer, but I hope it answers the question. And if you have any more specific questions about how this might apply to your situation, give us a call. But for the most part, if you're applying, if your organization is applying, your organization should be the one performing and carrying out the project. We have another question from Leslie Macedo. Will projects that cross state lines or involve collaborations be more competitive?
It's a great question. It's not really in the 7 criteria points. I guess we'll say not having it is not going to make you less competitive. But we do tell I guess it's a ghost criteria, which is confusing, and we apologize for that. But it's an overall goal of Mid-Atlantic Arts, not really specific to this program.
It's not part of the criteria, so it will not affect your score directly. But because this is a fairly competitive grant program, anything you can do to make your project stand out among the pool of applicants is always going to be a good idea. So you'll notice that when we talk to our panelists, we sort of orient them to only score based on the specific review criteria, which means that that's how they score you. However, if your project involves more collaboration and more collaborators, you may be able to provide a more robust answer to that community collaboration narrative question, and may make it easier for you to score highly in that area, for example. So no, those kinds of things will not make you more competitive on their own. But they might, if you're thinking about those things when you build your project, when you build your application, you may be able to provide more engaging or competitive responses to some of the things that are the criteria. That's a great question. Melanie Rivera de Leon asks, can individual artists apply for this grant? Unfortunately, not for this one. No, you have to be an organization with, like we said, that 501c3 nonprofit status, or a unit of local government, or a federally recognized tribal government entity to apply for this grant. We do have some other opportunities, not this one, that may be available to you as an individual artist. And if you'd like to hear about those, I suggest you reach out to us outside of this webinar. But you have to be an organization to apply for this. That has to do with the funding source for this grant. This is funded by the National Endowment for the Arts in part, and federal funding always requires some sort of nonprofit status. A good question.
We got another question from an anonymous attendee. Does the one-to-one match have to be secured before applying, or can it be acquired in the process? What do you think, Ellie?
So you don't have to already have the funding in order to apply, because we understand that everyone applies for funding in advance, and you may not have heard back that you've received the funding by the time you apply, but you do have to have a plan for it and tell us what the plan is, basically. And you do have to have proven that you were able to fulfill the match by the time you turn in your final report. So let's say you have a plan for what your one-to-one match would be when you apply. You receive a Folk and Traditional Community Projects grant from us, but you don't get the other grant you were counting on for the match. In order to keep your to remain in good standing with Mid-Atlantic Arts for the future, you have to come up with that one-to-one match some other way by the time you complete your project with us. But you don't have to already have the cash in your pocket when you apply, because we understand these are all sort of planning in advance. And that said, lots of things can fulfill the one-to-one match. We actually had a question asking what a one-to-one match is. So just to say really quickly, that basically means that however much funding you're asking for from us, you have to have an equal amount to put towards the project from a different funding source. So just basically to show that Mid-Atlantic Arts is not the only one funding this project, you have investment from other areas, and it has to be equal to the same amount that you're asking for from us. So let's say you ask for $4,000 from Mid-Atlantic Arts, you have to have $4,000 from a different funding source to put towards the same project, meaning your overall budget for the project would be at least $8,000. And again, if you have specific questions about how that applies to your project, I encourage you to talk to us because sometimes it can get complicated. But that money just cannot be from a federal source. So if you got a grant from a state organization, if you got a private donations, if you have revenue from like a paid participant fees, or other income or an endowment, any of those kinds of things could satisfy the match requirement.
Got a question. Is there a timeline for the proposed grant project? Yes, the timeline that the project needs to happen in will be that September 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. And if you're asking if there's a place to put in your own timeline, it's one of the narrative questions for you to lay out, at this stage we're planning, at this stage the thing's happening, at this stage it's all done, and everything that comes in between those. I hope that answers your question.
Can a festival with multiple artists performing qualify for the grant? Yes, absolutely. Again, as long as the festival or the entity applying meets that eligibility criteria of nonprofit status. But yes, a project can absolutely involve multiple traditional artists. If you have questions about how to sort of phrase that, what to emphasize, hit us up for a one-on-one conversation. But definitely a festival is an eligible project, and festivals usually have multiple artists performing. So definitely that would be something we could fund.
Erica asked that we mentioned that we only have 1,000 per budget line item. And I meant that, sorry, I may have misspoken, but you can have more than 1,000 in different budget line items. That was only for the equipment purchase / rental, can only be at 1,000. And then you had a second part of your question. When we create the one-to-one match, can we show 2,000 for the artist? Yes, there is a line specifically for what the artist will be paid, and that's often the line that the panelists look at with the most interest.
That's the line that's in the criteria. The budget criteria you'll see in our guidelines focus on compensation for artists.
Yes.
So definitely there's not a limit on how much you can put in the artist fee line item in your budget. But that's a good clarifying question. Rory Turner, hi, asks, how do you determine funding amounts? Do you partially fund requests, and is there an advantage to applying for a modest amount or the full eligible amount? That's a really good question. There is no advantage to applying for a smaller or a larger amount. The amount of your grant request is not a criterion. It has nothing to do with your score. Financial need is not a criterion. Grant request is not a criterion. So you should request the amount that you think is realistic for the project you want to carry out. And again, if you have questions about what that might be, let us know. Let's talk about it. We have partially funded requests in the past. We always want to be able to fund every request at 100% that we're able to fund. But because we do have limited funding for this, there will always be, just like there will always be some applications that receive no funding, there's always a chance that there will be some that will receive partial funding. And if you were in that boat where you receive partial funding and you have questions about carrying out the proposed project, we should have a conversation about that if you find yourself in that situation. But you don't need to worry about your funding, your grant request affecting how competitive you will be. I see somebody else asked, What do you mean by no fiscal sponsorship is allowed? I hope we answered that question earlier, but just to
If not,
reiterate,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. Just I was gonna say, just to reiterate, that just basically means that your nonprofit organization cannot be passing the funding through to another entity to carry out the project. Um, and if you have a question about how that applies to your specific situation, um, uh, let's talk about it. I know we keep saying that, but we love talking to people about their applications, and a lot of these questions are easy to get into the weeds on a one-to-one basis.
We have a question about the one-to-one match, and whether it can be in kind or whether it needs to be cash. And for those of you who may not be familiar, some grant opportunities allow you to provide a match with in kind. This could be someone's time that they value at an hourly rate. It could be a rental space that is donated that you don't have to pay for. Um, it's anything but cold hard cash. And for this grant, in kind is not allowed. It must be 100% cash match.
You can have all the in-kind contributions you want. They just won't count towards your match.
Yeah.
And we use the term cash match. That doesn't mean literally cash like paper currency, but it has to be
Money.
not donated assets, but donated or received actual funding. Um, Someone asked if we can share a copy of the PowerPoint. So this webinar, including the PowerPoint, a recording of that will be available on our website after this webinar. So you can see the PowerPoint there. You're also welcome to reach out to us individually and we can share it otherwise, but the easiest way to find it will be in this webinar recording. Has our fiscal sponsorship policy changed since last year? Not that I'm aware of. Joel, you were here last year and I was not, but I think it is the same.
It is the same. Yeah.
If you are selected to receive a grant and, for instance, are awarded $2,000, are you required to have the matching funds immediately? So, not exactly, no. So, if you are selected to receive a grant, you will get a grant agreement from Mid-Atlantic Arts that you will have to sign, specifying all the policies you're agreeing to by accepting the grant. And one of those policies is the fact that you need to match the funding one-to-one. We will not check up on whether you have done that until you submit your final report to us at the end of your grant award period. So you have to be able to indicate and prove that you have gotten that one-to-one cash match by the time you're done with your project. And you have to promise basically that you will be able to satisfy it when you accept the grant. But you don't have to sort of have one hand with our money and one hand with another money before you accept the grant. I know that sounds kind of like splitting hairs, but you should feel confident that you can make the match when you are applying and when you accept a grant is the best advice I can give. I know there's a lot of things that we can't control when we're trying to apply for funding like this, but you should be pretty comfortable with the fact that you'll be able to satisfy the match, because you wouldn't want to jeopardize your ability to apply for future funding by not being able to satisfy a match. And again, if you have specific concerns about that, we should talk about it. Give us a call.
April asked, does the project need to be new or can funding be requested to enhance or expand an existing program? No, the project does not need to be new. You can fund the same thing. That being said, it might not be as competitive if it's maybe a festival or an event that's remained unchanged for 30 years up against something that's newer and shinier. So it can often be in your advantage if you describe maybe how this is going to expand or bring in something new or address a new need that a community or project or an event has. John asked, how many grants do you typically fund? That's a great question, John. The first year we funded 16 grants, and those were all at 100% funding. Last year we funded 26 grants and we staggered it. So I don't think anybody received 100% funds, and or maybe a few.
I think a couple did, but
Couple
most
did.
people got between 70 and 80% funded, I think, right?
Yeah, we have a set amount that we have available to fund, and depending on how the panel review process goes, we stretch that out over the applications. Does that sound right, Ellie?
Yeah, I would say in the 20 ballpark is what we expect to be able to fund this year. But that does always depend on how many high scoring applications we receive. We expect we'll get a lot, and how much funding we have to give away. Um, how do in-kind contributions relate for the one-to-one match requirement? So they don't. So in-kind contributions are always great. It can mean you can stretch your resources further. It can mean that you have a lot of community buy-in and people who want to help make the project happen. So it can be maybe a good place to mention that kind of thing would be in that community collaboration narrative question. But you don't need to include any in-kind contributions in your budget, because it won't affect how your budget is evaluated, and it doesn't affect anything about the match requirement. Regarding the across state lines idea, does that mean the artist or participants must all be located in Mid-Atlantic region, or only the applicant presenting work? That's a really good question. Only the applicant has to be located in Mid-Atlantic's region. You can bring artists from outside the region. What's going to be important for you to talk about if you are doing that is in that that personnel question. So who's involved, is to be able to share who those artists or collaborators are and why they're the right person to bring into your community. But absolutely, you can bring in guest artists from other parts of the country or even other parts of the world. Just to be eligible, you, the applying organization, has to be located within Mid-Atlantic Arts region.
Someone asked, does this grant support exhibits? It does. Yes, is the answer. Can the matching funds be applied to a part of the project that is not in scope for the Mid-Atlantic grant?
Based on the way you phrase this question, I think yes, as long as they are for the same project. So let's say you're putting on a festival and you want to apply for a folk and traditional arts community project grant for one particular artist at the festival, to be able to bring in a traditional artist to participate in the festival, but you have another artist at the festival who you're paying for with a different source. That could satisfy your match requirement. If you're having a festival and you're bringing in an artist with a community projects grant, and you have a completely different activity later in the year, money for that activity could not satisfy your match requirement. But if it's a larger project with multiple sort of components and you want to apply for this grant to fund a particular component, other parts of the project funding could satisfy the match. It just has to be the same project. Again, specific questions, you know where to find us. That's a good question, though.
Ellie, can you hit this next slide with our contact?
Oh, yes. Thank you. I thought I did that. Good looking out.
That's
how to call us.
Yeah. I was like, they need to know. Okay. Is it okay to use NEA money for the project applied as long as it's not part of the match? Yes, I think so. As long
Yep.
as, help me out here.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
So yes, as long as it's not part of your match.
Yes, as long as it's
Um,
not part of the match. Yeah.
so if you got $2,000 from us, you got $10,000 from the NEA, you still need $2,000 from somewhere else to satisfy your match requirement for us. But we're not going to
And
tell you not to apply if you've gotten NEA money for the
and
same time.
you can't use the mat like the third part. You can't use that match as both a match for the NEA and for our
Yeah.
grant. I know that's kind of a
No, but
little
that's
hairy.
a really good point.
So if
You
you
can't
have that
double
extra
dip.
2,000, it has to be only used as a match for us. It can't be used as a match also for other federal funds.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The joys of matching requirements.
Grant project timeline, once again, it opened on the 24th of April. The grants will be due June 10th at 11:59 p.m. In which point we will enter the review process, which we should have notifications by the end of August. With funds coming to you September, the grant project period needs to be September 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025.
What is the content of the report produced at the end of the project? That's a great question. So if you receive a grant from us, when you sign your grant agreement, you will have access to the final report. It's an online form in the same platform that you apply through. It's called Smart Simple. And it includes a short section of narrative questions that relate back specifically to the narrative questions in your application, a budget, so a final budget to confirm what you actually spent the money on and what your match was, and then a few sort of standard questions that we ask across our programs, about things like how many participants you had, what their demographic information is, what sort of underserved communities they may have represented. And then we also ask to share some photos of the work, with asking for permission for us to use them in communications if you want. That is optional. And proof of crediting, which basically just means some proof that you included this project was funded by a Mid-Atlantic Arts Folk and Traditional Arts Community Project grant, in your marketing materials. It's fairly straightforward. It's designed to be able to complete in about 20 minutes or less.
Someone asked, my project is happening August 2024 and likely August 2025. Currently falls outside of the timeline range. Should I still apply or apply next year? That's tough.
It
You're
looks
not
like
going
you
to be
missed.
able to apply it for this cycle.
Yeah, looks like you missed the window for this year. But that should, based on our planning right now, that should fall within the window of next year's grants. So encourage you to apply for next year. If
Let me
your
see
project is
this.
only happening in August this year, it falls outside of the range. If your project has any continuing activities that extend into the fall, you might be eligible. But if it starts and ends in August 2024, hold out for next year. General operating funds can be applied to the match. No, project specific match funds. So, but that does mean that staff salary can count towards a match. Um, Again, let us know if you have specific questions about that.
Could the grant support? You got it.
No, you go ahead.
Could the grant support multiple programs over the course of the grant period? Oh,
So this program is designed to fund specific projects. So I would say if it's a series of related projects that are sort of part of, like, let's say it's a series of workshops, maybe with different kinds of artists, like a mix of performing and visual artists, but it's a series of workshops. that could sort of count as one project for this. But they should be related programs, because this is designed to fund sort of one project per grant. Although clearly how you interpret project can depend a little bit. So give us a call, send us an email if you want to discuss your specific situation.
I
We
think
got a
that's,
couple minutes left. Any last questions?
yeah, 10 minutes left. We don't have any more questions at the moment. But hey, if you think of some questions later down the road, we've said it once, we'll say it again. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. Call us anytime, and if we don't answer, it means we're probably in another call, and we'll get back to you soon. And we're happy to talk through any aspect of your application. Let's talk folklore. Come on. Call me. And you can see our emails are here. They're also available on our website. Anything else you want to add, Ellie, before we go?
No, thank you all so much for being here. I hope this was helpful, and hope to talk to you all soon about your projects.
Great. Well, thanks. You guys get 8 minutes back of your day, and I got to go get a haircut. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
I
everyone.
look forward to reading all your applications and getting all your calls. I'm going to stop recording.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to try.
You